When Sean Combs came into the world, surrounded by his young parents, Melvin and Janice, it was a picture that looked perfect from the outside. But behind that sense of luxury was a much darker truth, one that would quietly shape everything about the man he would become. His mother, Janice, was the kind of woman who carried herself with grace and focus. She worked as a teacher's assistant while modeling part-time, determined to give her small family a decent life. His father, Melvin Earl Combs, however, lived a life split down the middle. On one side, he was a respected U.S. Air Force veteran. On the other hand, once he returned home to Harlem, he stepped into the city's dangerous underworld, a place where fast money ruled and loyalty could turn deadly overnight. This was New York in the late 1960s and early 1970s, an era when Harlem's streets were controlled by powerful drug figures who operated like businessmen. Melvin wasn't just around that world, he was in it. People who knew him said he moved with the same kind of confidence and influence as the city's biggest names, men like Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes. Even Sean, years later, would admit that his father was right there among them, not far behind the legends who ran the scene.
My father was a hustler, you know. He was a drug dealer, he was a hustler.
For a while, the Combs family lived large. The money flowing in gave them a lifestyle that stood out in Harlem. Janice wore chinchilla coats, rode around in style, and her baby boy was dressed in mink. It was a picture of success, expensive cars, fine clothes, and access to everything most people could only dream of. And for little Sean, this became his earliest image of what success looked like. But in that world, power always came with a price. In 1972, when Sean was only 2 years old, everything changed. Melvin Combs, just 33, was found dead inside his car on Central Park West. He had been shot. It wasn't a random act of violence or a robbery gone wrong, it was deliberate. It was an execution. For years, Sean was kept in the dark about what really happened. His mother told him his father had died in a car accident, hoping to protect him from the truth. She didn't want him growing up haunted by the stigma of being the son of a drug dealer or the child of a man caught in the streets. The lie was meant to protect him, but it also left him with unanswered questions and a gap that would quietly define his drive and ambition. The deeper truth about Melvin's death is one of the most unsettling parts of Sean's story. People close to the case believe that Melvin had been killed because he was suspected of cooperating with law enforcement, essentially, that he was accused of betraying his circle. In that world, being labeled a snitch was the ultimate sin, and the punishment was death. Rumor had it that he had fallen out with a crew connected to a man known as New York Freddy, and that betrayal had sealed his fate.
Now this is New York Freddy, one of the biggest gangsters in Harlem. Puff father used to work for his team. He was brought in by one of his best friends. His father was murdered because he ratted out his team that he was working for.
What makes the story even more chilling is the detail that circulated afterward. The man believed to have pulled the trigger showed up at Melvin's funeral. He stood by the casket, mourning harder than anyone else, crying for the same man he had allegedly helped kill.
He said, and the guy who killed him was carrying the casket, crying the hardest at the funeral.
For young Sean, the impact was massive, even if he didn't understand it yet. His father's death left not only an emotional void, but also stripped away the comfort and security that had surrounded them. The money, the lifestyle, the sense of safety, it all vanished overnight. Janice and Sean were suddenly thrown into a much harsher reality. They left behind the glitz of Harlem and ended up in the Bronx, where life was about scraping by and holding things together. Still, that early trauma did something to Sean. It didn't break him, it ignited something inside him. The loss, the confusion, and the mystery surrounding his father's death became the fuel for his ambition. Years later, Sean finally uncovered the truth about his father. He reportedly found the old newspaper articles and police reports that confirmed what had really happened. That moment changed him forever. Instead of running from his father's legacy, he decided to reclaim it on his own terms. He wanted the same level of success and respect his father once commanded, but this time, he would do it differently. He made himself a promise. He'd rise to that same level of power, but legally. After her husband's death, Janice Combs suddenly found herself alone, young, widowed, and holding the full weight of raising her son, Sean, in a world that had already shown her how dangerous it could be. The glamour and comfort that once surrounded them disappeared almost overnight. What mattered now wasn't image or status, it was survival. Her only goal was to protect her son from the shadows of his father's past and give him a chance at something normal. To do that, she had to leave everything behind. Harlem had been home, so Janice packed up what little they had and began moving. First, they tried to settle in Mount Vernon, hoping for something quieter. But even that proved difficult. Eventually, she found herself in the South Bronx, where the only thing she could afford was a small unit inside the Patterson houses, a massive public housing project that promised affordability but often delivered struggle. Life inside those concrete towers was hard. The two-bedroom apartment they moved into belonged to Sean's aunt, and it wasn't the kind of place that offered much comfort. Some days, there wasn't even running water. The walls were thin, the noise constant, and the air heavy with the kind of fatigue that came from people just trying to make it through another day. For a woman who once wore chinchillas and lived in Harlem luxury, it was a brutal shift. For Sean, barely old enough to understand, it became his new reality. That new reality hit him early and hit him hard. The poverty around him wasn't just something he saw, it was something he felt. It shaped his hunger, his imagination, and eventually, his ambition. But there was one moment in particular, one day that burned itself into his memory, a moment he would later describe as the turning point of his life. He remembered waking up one morning and instantly realizing how deep their struggle had become. There was barely any food. The place smelled from neglect because no one had the means or energy to keep up. And then, in that moment that he would never forget, he opened his eyes and saw roaches crawling all over his face, dozens of them. That morning changed something in him. He was only a kid, but he understood what that moment meant. It was a symbol of defeat, a reminder that if he didn't find a way out, this would be his life forever. Right then and there, he made a silent promise to himself. He would never live like that again. He would find a way to rise, to succeed, and to make sure his family never saw struggle like that again. That realization became his first spark of ambition. He didn't have money or opportunity, but he had motivation. He started seeing every challenge as fuel. Whenever life got too comfortable, even decades later, he said he'd remember that moment, lying in that apartment with roaches crawling across his face, and it would remind him to keep pushing. Meanwhile, Janice was doing everything in her power to keep some sense of order in their world. She worked tirelessly, modeling when she could, taking on teaching assistant jobs, anything that kept the lights on, and her son in school. She refused to let the chaos of their environment define him. For all the hardship, she ran her household with discipline. She believed deeply in structure, faith, and education. She enrolled Sean in St. Martin of Tours Catholic School, making sure he learned not just academics, but manners and accountability. Every day, she drilled one simple message into him. If he wanted to live differently, if he wanted success, it started with focus and education. In her words, the path was clear. Go to school, work hard, and one day, you can be a millionaire. Janice's strength and discipline became the framework for Sean's growing determination. While other kids played without thinking much about the future, he was already plotting how to change his circumstances. The Bronx around him was filled with loud energy, hustlers, and dreamers, but Sean's energy was different. His friends noticed it early. That intense energy soon earned him a nickname that would stick for life. As Sean Combs grew older, he began to find his rhythm both in school and in life. These years marked the point where his mother's constant discipline started to take root. The wild energy that had once been pure survival instinct was now being shaped into focus. At St. Martin of Tours and later Mount St. Michael Academy, Sean quickly stood out, not as a troublemaker, but as a model student. He hit the honor roll consistently, impressing teachers with his grades and his determination. Janice's rules were simple and firm. Education came first. She was relentless about it, repeating the same mantra day after day. If you want to be a millionaire, you start with school. Sean took those words seriously. He studied hard, carried himself with confidence, and began to realize that his mother wasn't just trying to keep him out of trouble, she was teaching him how to think like a winner. But Sean wasn't all books and quiet ambition. Outside the classroom, he was explosive, athletic, and competitive to the bone. Football became his first real stage, the first arena where he could prove to everyone that he wasn't just another kid from the projects. He joined the Mount St. Michael football team and quickly became the star running back. He played with a kind of electricity that matched his personality, fast, intense, and fearless. His drive pushed the team to victory, and by 1986, they'd taken home the division championship, with Sean being named the MVP. It was his first taste of public success, the first time the world around him clapped for something he built through sheer willpower. That football field did more than just show off his athletic ability, it revealed his hunger. Every time he sprinted across the turf, he was running from everything that had haunted him as a child. The roaches, the poverty, the absence of his father. Winning wasn't just about trophies, it was about proving he was in control now. Still, behind that polished surface was something raw and volatile. Sean was smart and disciplined, but he also had a short fuse. There was a fire in him that didn't always stay contained. When things didn't go his way, that same fire exploded into frustration. His classmates saw it often enough that it eventually earned him a nickname. The story most people know about how he got the name Puffy paints it as something playful, almost cute. But the truth is much sharper than that. He didn't get the name because of any lighthearted moment. It came from his temper. Whenever Sean got angry, he would start breathing heavily, his face swelling up as he huffed and puffed. It became his signature reaction. People started calling him Puffy, not to tease him, but because that anger was so visible, it practically defined him. The name that would later become a global brand started as a reminder of his inability to hide his emotions. Looking back, those early years shaped the foundation for everything that came next. The Catholic school structure gave him order and routine. The football field gave him a taste of victory. And the streets reminded him that life could take everything from you if you weren't always ready to fight for it. Soon, that same drive that made him an MVP and a standout student would push him off the field and into a new kind of hustle. The young Sean Puffy Combs was starting to look beyond his neighborhood. By the time Sean Combs hit his teenage years, his mindset had completely shifted. The fear of waking up broke in the projects had burned itself deep into him, turning into one clear obsession: he had to get rich, and he had to do it fast. Sean wasn't the type to wait for an opportunity to knock. He already knew that the slow, traditional route, college, degree, steady job, wasn't going to get him to the kind of money he wanted. He'd seen how his father moved, how quick money flowed through the streets, and while he wasn't trying to go down the same illegal path, he understood the principles behind the hustle. The game was about finding a lane, building something fast, and keeping it moving.
I definitely think the route that I went on, staying out the streets and, hitting my books and trying to be somebody, I think he played a role in that.
His first real taste of business came through something that fit him perfectly: music. He started throwing parties around Mount Vernon and Harlem, spinning vinyl at local teen events. What started as a hobby quickly turned into a business. He wasn't just DJing, he was building a brand before he even knew what branding was. Every night he got behind those turntables, he studied how people reacted, how to make a crowd move. He learned the power of energy, rhythm, and timing. People started to recognize that whenever Puffy was throwing a party, it was going to be packed, loud, and unforgettable. He charged $5 to $10 at the door, depending on the event. Nothing fancy, cash only, no exceptions. But what set him apart was what he did next. Instead of blowing the money on clothes or sneakers, he reinvested it. Every dollar went back into his setup: better speakers, stronger amps, cleaner sound. He was improving his product without even calling it that. He knew instinctively that to keep growing, he had to make the experience better every time. The flyers were handmade, usually painted or scribbled in bold letters, then plastered around the neighborhood or passed hand to hand. Word spread fast, and soon, Puffy's parties were the talk of Mount Vernon. But Sean wasn't satisfied. The parties were fun and brought in quick cash, but they were inconsistent. He needed something steadier, something that could make him real money on a schedule. That's when he found his next hustle, transportation. Most teenagers were still figuring out homework and high school dances, but Sean was already thinking like a small business owner. He set up a shuttle service that ran people between the major airports and Manhattan hotels. This wasn't a random side gig. He treated it like a full-blown business. He had routes, drivers, and customers. He even hired classmates to help him run it, assigning them schedules and tracking who was doing what. He made around $150 a week, which for a teenager in the mid-80s was impressive. But more importantly, he was learning how business actually worked, how to deal with people, manage logistics, handle payments, and keep operations smooth. The shuttle hustle became a test run for the mogul he was becoming. It taught him the same structure he would later apply when building his record label empire. He learned how to find talent, delegate roles, and manage people. Except back then, his artists were drivers and his audience was travelers. Even at that age, Sean was already showing signs of the businessman he'd become: confident, strategic, and unapologetically competitive. People who knew him back then said he was all business, all the time. Even as a teen, he was relentless when it came to closing deals. If another local service charged a certain price, Sean would swoop in with a cheaper offer just to steal their clients. He understood early that undercutting competition wasn't dirty, it was smart. He played every move like chess, always thinking 2 steps ahead. And when it came to money, he was ruthless. Once you paid him, that was it. There were no refunds, no complaints, no negotiations. If someone didn't like the service or tried to argue about pricing, Sean shut it down immediately. His philosophy was simple: once the money's in his hand, it's his. That no-nonsense transactional mindset was a clear preview of how he'd run Bad Boy years later: efficient, calculated, and always in control. By 16, Sean Combs wasn't just another kid from Harlem trying to make ends meet. He was already thinking like a CEO. He had built small businesses, managed people, and learned how to turn energy into money. Everything Sean did during those teenage years pointed toward one thing: control. Control over his time, his money, and his destiny. And as his world got bigger, so did his dreams. By the time Sean Combs hit 17, he was already thinking like a mogul in training. The nickname Puffy had become more than a name. It was a brand, a signal that he was someone to pay attention to. So when it came time for college, he made a move that was as calculated as it was ambitious. He left behind the hustle of the Bronx and Mount Vernon and headed straight for Washington, D.C., enrolling at Howard University, a school known for producing some of the sharpest black professionals and leaders in the country. On paper, he was there to study business administration, but in reality, Sean had a different agenda. Howard wasn't just a campus to him, it was an opportunity, a playground, a market. The lessons he planned to learn weren't coming from textbooks, they were coming from experience. He looked at Howard the same way he once looked at his neighborhood streets, as a place to build connections, make money, and elevate his name. From the moment he arrived, his hustle kicked in. The kid who once threw basement parties in Mount Vernon immediately turned the college scene into his new business arena. He started hosting parties again, only this time, the scale was bigger, the crowd louder, and the money fatter. Every weekend, students flooded into his events, which quickly became the talk of the entire campus. These weren't small dorm get-togethers, they were full-blown productions. Puffy turned ordinary basements into nightlife experiences, complete with booming speakers, flashy lights, and a vibe nobody else could match. His parties became the place to be. Even major stars of that era started showing up. Dougie Fresh, Slick Rick, Guy, and Heavy D would pull through, and the buzz around them would send attendance through the roof. Sean charged around $10 a head, and by the end of the night, he was clearing up to $2,000 per party. For a teenager in college, that was serious money. But what really made him stand out wasn't just the business side, it was his energy. He wasn't the type to stand in the corner and count his earnings. Puffy was the show. He danced, hyped the crowd, and made sure the room felt alive from start to finish. School, though, quickly took a back seat. Sean had started out genuinely trying to study business, but the classroom walls began to feel too small. While professors lectured about corporate structures and long-term strategy, Puffy was already living it in real time. He was selling mixtapes across campus, cutting small promotional deals, and even flipping term papers for quick profit. By his sophomore year, Sean realized that waiting 4 years for a diploma wasn't part of his plan. He was itching for something bigger, something real. He didn't want to learn about business. He wanted to be the business. That opportunity came knocking in the form of Uptown Records, one of the hottest labels in New York at the time. Sean saw it as his ticket out of college and into the industry he was meant for. But he wasn't going to get in through traditional means. He didn't have fancy recommendations or an impressive academic resume. What he had was grit and results. He started by reaching out to Andre Harrell, the head of Uptown, but he didn't just send a normal internship request. His message was filled with hustle. He laid out his real-world accomplishments, detailing how he made thousands throwing parties, sold mixtapes, and even ran an airport shuttle service as a teen. It was unconventional, but it worked. With a little help from Heavy D, who vouched for him, Sean landed an interview. Andre Harrell was skeptical at first. An eager kid from Howard claiming he could bring value to a major record label was a stretch. But when he saw the spark in Sean's eyes and the confidence in his tone, he gave him a shot. Sean got the internship. It was unpaid, but to him, it was worth more than any paycheck. This was the gateway to his dream. At first, he balanced it all, taking classes during the week in DC, then traveling back and forth to New York every chance he got. It was a 4-hour trip each way, but Sean didn't care. He'd sweet-talk professors into letting him skip class, promising he'd make up the work later. Andre Harrell quickly saw something different in him. Sean wasn't like other interns who fetched coffee and stayed quiet in the background. He asked questions, gave ideas, and worked tirelessly. He wanted to be in every meeting, every studio session, every conversation. His energy was relentless. Andre was so impressed that he started treating Sean like family, even letting him stay at his house when he needed a place in the city. And just like that, the young hustler from the Bronx was now working side by side with some of the most influential people in the music industry. Within a year, that unpaid intern had risen to become the coordinator of artist and repertoire, a position that put him in charge of finding and shaping talent. He was barely 20 years old and already making major moves inside a professional label. But with that meteoric rise came something else, a growing impatience and a hunger that couldn't be contained. Puffy was moving faster than most people could handle, and while his drive was his biggest strength, it was also a ticking time bomb. The next chapter of his life would show just how explosive that combination could be. Within months at Uptown, Puffy became one of the most talked about young executives in the industry. While other interns were still figuring out how to make coffee for the higher-ups, Puffy was crafting an entirely new sound and look that would change R&B and hip-hop forever. At Uptown, he saw something that most people missed. He realized there was a gap between the grit of the streets and the smooth polish of R&B. Puffy didn't want one or the other, he wanted both. He fused the two worlds together, creating what came to be known as hip-hop soul. That sound was embodied in artists like Jodeci and a young Mary J. Blige. Puffy molded them like a director shaping a film. Jodeci had the look of bad boys in leather, and Mary had the voice and edge that made her relatable to women who grew up in the struggle, but still dreamed big. When she dropped her debut album, What's the 411, it didn't just sell records, it reshaped the entire music landscape. Puffy became known as a creative genius. People marveled at how this kid barely out of his teens had such a sharp understanding of image, rhythm, and presentation. He knew how to make the streets feel glamorous and how to make the mainstream embrace authenticity. But success, especially when it comes fast, has a dangerous side. The same high-energy, no-sleep drive that had pushed him to the top also made him reckless. He wanted everything bigger, bigger events, bigger crowds, bigger wins. And that hunger for scale led to a night that would haunt him for years. In December 1991, Puffy decided to organize a celebrity basketball game at the City College of New York. It was meant to be a fun, star-studded event. Heavy D was one of the main attractions, and with Puffy's growing name in New York, everyone wanted to be there. But things spiraled out of control. Word spread too fast, tickets were oversold, and the gym simply wasn't built to handle that many people. Thousands showed up, hoping to get in, and the atmosphere quickly shifted from excitement to chaos. As the crowd packed tighter, the staircase leading down to the gym became a bottleneck. People were pushing, screaming, trying to escape. Within moments, the situation turned deadly. 9 people lost their lives in the crush, and 29 more were injured.
She passed out unconscious. They can't revive her.
It was one of the worst concert-related tragedies in the city's history. Puffy was there, in the middle of it all, watching his dream event turn into a nightmare.
City College was a deep experience for me. I was there, I was on the floor, I watched people take their last breath, regurgitate, and die.
The aftermath was devastating. The city launched a full investigation, led by Mayor David Dinkins, and the report's conclusion was blunt. Nearly everyone involved had failed to act responsibly. While Puffy wasn't charged criminally, he and others were hit with civil lawsuits from the victims' families. He later admitted that the experience sent him into a deep depression. But as horrific as the tragedy was, there were even darker allegations that surfaced later, ones that painted the night in an even more disturbing light. Years after the incident, a lawsuit claimed that just before the chaos broke out, a woman known only as Jane Doe was lured into a private area under the pretense of meeting an artist.
Sean Diddy Combs is facing new allegations of sexual assault. This time, a woman claims the rapper drugged and sexually assaulted her in New York City back in 1991.
She alleged that Puffy gave her a drink that made her feel dizzy and then assaulted her. The story claimed the encounter was cut short when a bodyguard interrupted, warning him that something was happening outside. The woman said he threatened her not to speak about it before leaving to deal with the unfolding stampede. Those allegations, though never proven in court, added a chilling layer to an already tragic night. For Uptown Records, the pressure was too much. Andre Harrell, Puffy's mentor, and the man who had believed in him from day one, had no choice but to make a painful decision. Puffy was fired. Just like that, the young executive who had changed the sound of R&B was out. For most people, that would have been the end. But Sean Combs regrouped. By 1993, he was back on his feet with something much bigger, his own record label. He called it Bad Boy Entertainment. His first major signing was a Brooklyn rapper named Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie Smalls. Puffy saw in Biggie what the industry didn't yet understand, the perfect mix of grit, charm, and lyrical brilliance. Together, they were about to redefine hip-hop in the same way Puffy had transformed R&B. It didn't take long for Bad Boy to explode. Puffy landed a massive $15 million distribution deal with Arista Records. Then came the label's first major hit, Craig Mack's Flava in Ya Ear, which dominated the charts and put Bad Boy on the map instantly. At just 24, Sean Puff Daddy Combs had gone from hustling shuttle rides to running one of the most powerful labels in hip-hop. But as fast as he was rising, the darkness from his past was never far behind. The same hunger that fueled his ambition began twisting into something else: obsession, paranoia, and an insatiable need for control. It was no longer about success, it was about dominance. And that endless chase for more, that refusal to ever feel satisfied, would eventually send him spiraling into a dark hole, one that would transform him from a celebrated mogul into one of the most disgraced figures in modern music history.